Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That's great. Let's try it again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, awesome. So I'm sorry I'm late. I was stuck on a stalled R train, as many of you have probably experienced, so I apologize that we're running a few minutes late. It's entirely my fault. My name is Kyle Kimball. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations here and Community Engagement here at NYU. And I'm sort of playing two roles today. I'm also very proud to be a board member for a very long time of the Center for Urban Future, our host today. And it's great to be here at NYU in Tandon, which, as you can see, is such an important anchor for this amazing borough. And this is really the fourth of CUF's 5 Borough Forum series in expanding access to tech careers. And it's far and away one of our largest audiences to date. So thank you for joining us today. And a big thank you to Amazon for making today's event possible. So yes, good job. So the Center for Urban Future, for those of you who don't know, is a think tank that is focused on building a stronger and more inclusive economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. We know that creating a more equitable economy will require a number of new policies and investments, but few things will be as important as ensuring that far more New Yorkers, particularly of color, can access well-paying jobs that are growing here. Now, more than ever, those are tech jobs. I don't think any other organization in the city has done as much to think and do research and put forth many specific ideas on how to expand access to tech careers in New York City and as the Center for Urban Future. And that's something we're very proud of doing. So thank you, Jonathan, for leading that charge. In that process, CUF has published studies about the opportunity to harness CUNY as a launch pad into tech careers and to scale up the promising CUNY 2x Tech programs, the need to scale up our most effective tech training programs across the city, the potential to expand tech apprenticeships, and the need to train more future school teachers to incorporate computational thinking in their classrooms. But so much work remains, both citywide and right here in Brooklyn. And in order to shine light on this opportunity and tee up solutions, CUF has partnered with Amazon to convene forums in all 5 boroughs to discuss how to close the opportunity gap for tech careers. And we're excited to explore specific opportunities and challenges here in Brooklyn. But before we move on, I really want to again extend a very big thank you to Amazon for sponsoring this series and for making today's event possible. I'd also like to thank my colleagues here at NYU, Tandon, for hosting us, and the many organizations that have partnered with us on today's event, including the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, Brooklyn Public Library, St. Nick's Alliance, Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, Central Brooklyn EDC, Brooklyn Workforce Innovations, CAMBA, Goodwill of New York and New Jersey, Blue Ridge Labs at Robin Hood, NPower, NYC, ETC, and Perscolis. Many of these organizations we've worked over. Thank you, yes. Many of these organizations I worked with throughout my career on economic development, so it's great to see the ecosystem that is continuing. But now I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Amazon's New York Head of Public Policy and a 4th-generation Brooklynite, Jessica Schumer.
Thank you, Kyle. Good morning, everyone. As Kyle mentioned, my name is Jessica Schumer, and I lead public policy for Amazon in New York City. I'm especially excited to be with you this morning in my home of Brooklyn. As Kyle mentioned, I am a 4th-generation Brooklynite, and I am raising the 5th generation just down the block, actually. And I know everything this great borough has to offer. My role at Amazon has given me the opportunity to give back to the place I call home, serving on the boards of such great Brooklyn institutions as the Brooklyn Children's Museum, the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, and the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. And Amazon is privileged to have hundreds of employees from both our corporate and operational workforces living, working, and growing their careers right here in Brooklyn. We have a large operational footprint in the borough, delivering packages and groceries to our customers in Brooklyn. Additionally, Amazon Studios, music, and fashion all have offices over in Williamsburg on Kent Avenue. And in the last 10 years, Amazon has created more jobs than any other company in the United States. We are focused on helping New Yorkers access well-paying tech jobs. We've made large investments to ensure that we are paying a fair wage for all employees, as well as giving our workforce great benefits and making sure people have access to programs and education to further enhance their skill sets. Because of all these things, we often say that Amazon has a job for every New Yorker. Speaking of education, We are proud of our partnerships with CUNY and other workforce development organizations, some of which we'll hear from today. Here in Brooklyn, at CUNY's Kingsborough Community College, we are prepaying tuition for our hourly employees to further their careers in the industry of their choosing through a program called Career Choice. Many choose tech. And earlier this year, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, launched a partnership with 3 CUNY colleges to integrate AWS cloud curriculum into key programs of study. AWS and its employer partners work directly with CUNY faculty to prepare students for cloud roles like technical account managers, solution architects, and quality assurance engineers. These are early career roles in demand from a large bench of employers, not just AWS. Upon completion of this coursework, we facilitate on-campus recruiting events. Additionally, last month, we opened the long-awaited CUNY classroom in the lobby of Amazon's newest corporate office at the old Lord & Taylor building in Midtown. Students from Kingsborough Community College and other schools will have the opportunity to learn in our building alongside our tech leadership. Of course, NYU Tandon is welcome as well. This partnership is a first for CUNY as the major employer. It is also the first for Amazon globally with an academic institution, and we're doing it right here in New York. Today, we're going to talk more about how to cultivate pathways for more Brooklyn residents. I want to thank Amazon's partners critical to scaling this effort, many of whom are here today, including Perscolis, the Marcy Lab School, the Mayor's Office of Talent and Workforce Development, and of course, our partners in state and local elected office. And now I'd like to hand it over to Jonathan Bowles, Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. Thank you to CUF for all you're doing, bringing an open mind and ideas to today's conversation. Jonathan.
All right, thanks, Jessica. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. I'm Jonathan Bowles, Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. I just want to say a quick thanks to Amazon. You know, we've been, they've sponsored this forum series, which has been, I think, incredibly helpful and valuable in surfacing good ideas, specific things that we ought to be doing in each borough and as a city to really kind of create more of a pipeline into tech careers, to expand access to these well-paying jobs. I also want to shout out to Amazon because they were our sponsor for a study we did a little more than a year ago called Harnessing CUNY as a Launchpad into Tech Careers. And just a few weeks ago, one of our big ideas from that report, scaling up the really promising CUNY 2X Tech program, became a reality, and the city dedicated $10 million towards the expansion of CUNY 2X Tech to more CUNY campuses. So we were really thrilled about that, and that really helped. That really came about from our research together. Also, can I get a big thank you and applause for the Center for an Urban Future staff? You'll see Eli moderating our panel, and if you've been to CUF events, you know how amazing Eli is. But I want to thank all of our other staff that's here that really contributes so much to the work we do at the organization, and just from me, genuinely, just so appreciative of the work that they're doing. So thank you. Also, the only thing I want to do till we get started with this panel is to just kind of tease a couple of things that you'll see in the coming weeks from the Center for an Urban Future. First of all, we're here today because we think that expanding access to tech careers is one of the really key things we can do to create a more inclusive city and borough. But also stay tuned. We are really excited. In about a month's time, we're going to be publishing a study that will be 50 ideas for creating a stronger and more equitable Brooklyn. We're actually going to be doing a series of borough reports with ideas from people in the borough. So the Brooklyn report is going to include 50 ideas from Brooklyn leaders for how to create a more equitable borough. And we're excited about that. We're partnering with brooklyn.org. So stay tuned for that. A few people in the audience actually have ideas in our report, and we thank you for that. But that will be coming out soon. Also, in the next few days, maybe as soon as tomorrow, we're still kind of figuring it out. We're going to be publishing another exciting report that's going to surface 20 creative ideas for generating revenues for how to pay for parks and open spaces in New York. We know that parks are more important than ever after the pandemic, but they often really struggle to get the funding that they need, whether to maintain parks or to expand parks into new communities that really kind of need them. And so, so we're excited about this report. It's going to have some really creative financing mechanisms and new funding streams, and so stay tuned for that. And now I think I just want to bring up the panel, and Eli, if you could all come up and enjoy the show.
Okay. Let me try that again. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody tuning in online as well. I think we have over 150 people that have signed up to be here virtually as well, so good morning to all of you. Welcome, everyone. It's such a thrill to moderate this discussion. I'm just going to get right into the conversation. For folks that may not know everybody on this panel, and you may all know them already, you can see in your materials, there's a QR code. You can check out everybody's bios in detail. We just want to get right into the conversation. So let me start with kind of the big picture question here. Our research has shown that over the past decade, the tech sector has really become the most reliable source of new middle and high wage jobs in New York City. A lot of those jobs have actually grown here in Brooklyn. 114,000 jobs overall over the past decade just in tech in New York City. And we've seen obviously that as that sector has grown, more New Yorkers certainly are getting those jobs, but we still see some major disparities, and we certainly see them here in Brooklyn, where, like the city overall, we see that, while Black and Hispanic residents make up almost half the workforce, they hold just about 20% of the jobs in tech. Women hold only about a quarter of the jobs in the city's tech sector. So clearly, we've got a ways to go, and we've made some real progress. All of your organizations have contributed to that progress, but we still see that there's a major gap to close. So I want to just start for all of you with a big picture question here. When you think about what's needed now to help more Brooklyn residents from all over the borough get on the path to the good jobs that are growing, the tech-powered jobs that are growing here in the borough and across New York City, where do we need to focus our energy? We've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do, and there's a lot of competing priorities out there. So where should we focus now to help expand access to Brooklyn residents? And I'd throw this open to anybody who wants to jump in.
Good morning, everyone. I'll jump in.
Morning.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Yep. All right. I'll use my principal voice. I'll try because it was a really long night playing Secret Tooth Fairy with my 5-year-old. But I think one of the things that we should consider is making those career training opportunities more accessible. I think I saw in the news recently that we're cutting funding to libraries, and that library hours are now going to be more limited. But why don't we think about putting these types of career training programs? Wow, that hit me. These types of opportunities like the Marcy Lab School, Brooklyn STEAM Center, or adult career tech ed programs teaching people about the tech sector in places like public libraries and removing some of those barriers. Let's provide stipends for people to take these training opportunities. Let's provide transportation stipends. Let's provide food while they're there, because I think it's a hard decision for a lot of Brooklyn residents to give up maybe 2 to 3 part-time jobs or their full-time jobs to learn about the tech sector and to access career training opportunities for entry into those spaces.
I just want to pick up on what Kayon said about accessible. So we're sort of like the leading edge of the spear of workforce. We're younger, right? So we're PK to 12, but accessible, and for us, free in terms of, again, K to 12, PK to 12, and also, so number one, free and accessible. Number two, resources. It's interesting, Natasha Williams in the last CUF panel in Queens basically said, there's more going on in Queens, but there's still deserts, right? And so how do you patch the deserts and make sure that everyone's getting access to these resources? And so really distributing it equitably throughout the borough and really being thoughtful about that.
Hello? All right, just make sure it's on. Same thing. I would say it's really about accessibility, but us thinking strategically about what that actually means when we talk about reaching the communities and the individuals that need it most. If we're noticing that the opportunities are there, but it's not reaching the communities, then I think the gap becomes how do we think more creatively around reaching the communities and individuals. And what I mean by that particularly is when we first started at AmeriCorps in Tech, what we would do was a very grassroots approach. It would be going to library branches and building rapport with the individuals that work there. It would be going to barber shops. It would be going to laundromats, places of intersection where we thought we could find the individuals that we were trying to reach, because we knew our program was there, but we had to work on making sure that everyone that we wanted to know about our initiatives were hearing about it. So I would take that as an example and then drill down, and I could talk more about that during the panel.
And I think we all said the word accessibility, and that's a prominent word. But I think it's also the destigmatization of programs like ours. So I've been with NPower for 10 years, and when I joined the program, we had partners that wanted to work with us, and they loved the idea of diverse tech talent, which is what we were training. But that always came with and has a college degree attached to it at the end. And in the last decade, we've made tremendous strides in destigmatizing talent that doesn't have a formal degree. And I say this at NYU, my alma mater, sorry, but I think that there are pathways to success that may not include college for all people all the time. And what we've also noticed, and one of my colleagues is in the audience doing some tabling, is when we used to go to high schools, for instance, and do events and do info sessions or tabling, students didn't know what we were or who we are. They couldn't imagine an organization like ours. Either they were wholly not ready to go to higher education, or they were extremely focused on college. As they had been taught, like my parents taught me and their parents taught them, that is the way to middle class. And what we're finding now, and it's been very helpful with New York City high schools and some of the nonprofit partners that serve a younger audience, is they are now promoting organizations like an NPower or Marcy Lab or Perscolas, and sharing that information with their students. In fact, there is an office dedicated in the Board of Ed in the New York City Department of Education that specifically works with programs like ours and getting into the community, and that's been really revolutionary for NPower and similar programs.
Reuben, I feel like this sets you up really well, in fact, because you run a program, Marcy Lab School, with a fellowship that's focused on 18 to 24-year-olds without a college degree. And I would just add, in Brooklyn, that's such a huge need because we have such inequities when it comes to college attainment in Brooklyn, in particular. Well, where we are right now, I think about 80% or more of residents have a college degree. A few miles away in East New York, it's about 15%. So we've got a huge gap there. Obviously, part of the challenge is closing that gap. But I think what your program demonstrates is that part of the solution may be offering alternative pathways that actually can lead not just to good jobs in general, but to jobs in tech. So help me understand, how does that work? What is it about your model that's successful? Do we need more of it if we're going to help more Brooklyn residents be able to get on the path to these kinds of good jobs?
I'm going to take Eli on the road with me. Yeah, thank you for that tee up. And this is exactly what the Marcy Lab School was founded for. College is always going to be an incredible pathway to economic mobility for thousands and thousands of young people in the city. And we also know that every year, no matter what we do, there will be thousands and thousands of young people in the city who are going to need other pathways, who have a ton of potential, who are ready to work hard, who believe that their life should amount to more than what we say is true for people without college degrees. And the Marcy Lab School is around because we think those young people have not been served well. I think about principals like Kayon, who advises their young people that, you know, if there's a college opportunity that is for you and it is affordable and allows you a pathway to a career that you want without a lifelong amount of debt, you should pursue that. But if you have aspirations of being a creator, an entrepreneur, a tech professional, there are a ton of other programs like NPower, like the Marcy Lab School that I'll create connections for. And I think more of that needs to be here. You asked the question, like, what could we do to create more access? I think one of the things is removing the biggest barrier, which is the pathway into a job and the college degree being that barrier. Why the Marcy Lab School, why programs like NPower can exist is because tech is a career of production. We have this benefit, this ability now to be able to partner with companies that will interview our fellows based on what they can produce in the interview process, based on the portfolio that they can bring forward. We have partners like AWS who support our program to make sure that it's tuition free. And what we've seen is that young people, young as 19, 20 years old, are being able to navigate into careers for the first time at companies that traditionally only hire college degrees, graduates. And instead, these 19 and 20-year-olds with no debt are walking into jobs that pay more than $100,000 a year, and they're sitting beside their counterparts who do have college degrees. And so in that way, it's not just a pathway to economic mobility, but it's also a pathway to social mobility. And if the question is, should there be more of them? The answer is absolutely.
Well, let me ask a little bit about how we do that. And Evin, let me bring you back into this conversation. You know, you grew up in East New York and Brownsville. You kind of know firsthand what it's like to be able to access those opportunities that can lead to a career that takes you, outside of the neighborhood. But you also wanted to come back to the neighborhood to begin kind of giving back. And I know that American Tech started with, I think, a cohort of 20 students. You've now served, correct me if I'm wrong, but over 5,000, not just here, but in other places across the country. But I want to kind of bring it back to Brownsville and East New York and Brooklyn. When you kind of think about what it would take to be able to scale up the impact even further of a program like American Tech, or just thinking in general about what's needed to make sure that a lot more Brooklyn residents, young people today, could be able to pursue these careers in the future, where are those investments really needed? What's needed to actually be able to go beyond the scale of the infrastructure that we have today?
Certainly. So first I'll start with the kind of bit of the origin story. So when we first started American Tech, we were really focused on East New York and Brownsville. But the problem we were running into was getting the information out. And that's why just before I was talking about our approach was more grassroots in the way that we went about reaching the community that we needed to reach, our own community. And within those approaches, what we did is we built a pretty good network of individuals that would help us get the name out of our work. So by going to different laundromats, laundromat managers would introduce me to other laundromat managers, and then I would have an email list of different laundromat managers that would say, hey, you can come in and post flyers here, right? No one was taking them down anymore. Same thing with barbershops. What you'll notice in certain communities is maybe this barber has a connection with this barbershop, etc. And then with the libraries, I would literally go into the different library branches in East New York and in Brownsville, and then they introduced me to someone at the Grand Army Plaza library that then helped me get on a big circulation list. So with that approach of taking grassroots, that helped us build this network of communication pipelines that was hard for us to get in the beginning. And the hard but honest truth is, when we first started, I would literally go up to the high schools, but the high schools weren't very helpful. I would go to Transit Tech, I would go to Jefferson, places like that. And I would come, and they were kind of looking at me like, all right, what are you doing here? And I'm explaining to them that we've created this program. We're trying to get it in the hands of the students that live in our communities, and that approach wasn't effective. So we had to take it a different approach. Now the question around how do we continue to scale up the work that we're doing at AOT? We've had amazing, impact. We have students getting really high starting salaries. And so when we think about leveraging up that impact, the big thing here becomes, one, funding. And I know we're going to talk about that on this panel. How do we create really supportive ecosystem of funding that can go into programs like this and make it less about raising funds? Because it's very hard to run a program and really be community first, but at the same time, trying to go out and corral and raise, an annual budget every year. And so when we think about how do we remove that barrier of accessing funding, I think that's very important. And then two, really how do we create that pipeline? Like after you go through this training opportunity, what are the next steps for the residents, right? It isn't just a certificate. It isn't just saying, hooray, you've completed this program, but what does that pipeline look like for individuals to actually access job opportunities, career growth, and then things that can really change the needle for themselves and their families?
That's really helpful, Evin. I want to ask maybe everybody a little bit more than about kind of building out those pathways. And maybe, yeah, it's a good chance to bring you back in, Michael, partly because we're talking about libraries a lot so far, which I love, but partly because we're also talking about how we actually reach young people in different ways. So I'd love to ask you more about this, understanding the role of NYC first in introducing a lot of young people in Brooklyn to technology. But tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Right. I guess the first thing is that our view of STEM education is in some ways through the prism of robotics. And robotics does a couple of things in terms of building a mindset and skill set for success. So it's an overarching sort of set of STEM disciplines. So it's coding, and it's mechanical engineering, and it's math, and it's physics, and it's AI, and it's sensors, and so on and so forth, right? And those are all skills that are prized today by a lot of employers. Kind of the how we do it as team sport in a lot of ways makes it fun, and there's a lot of collaboration, and really there's the building of the mindset. And a lot of employers value the mindset in some ways at least as much as the skill set nowadays. And so combine powerful propellants for young people across Brooklyn, across the city. The second thing is, yeah, the school system does a lot, but there are ways, obviously, to complement the school system. And so the way we work is we have district-wide school day programs, and so we're basically casting a wide net. So a lot of kids basically said, oh, I can't do robotics, or I can't do STEM. But if they have to, if they're part of a district-wide program, they do, and what we find time and again is that the students who don't think they can do it, and they rock at it. They're extraordinary. And so we cast a wide net, but we also have after-school leagues, and this way students have an outlet to do yet more. And you mentioned the libraries, so we've worked for years with Brooklyn Public Library. They've had robotics teams in our leagues for many years. And so you could be in a part of the city that maybe your school doesn't do it, but you can walk in for free to that library, and we've trained the library staff to be robotics coaches. It's been a great opportunity outside of the school system. And so, number one, robotics. Number two, sort of the waterfront in and out. Number three, it's important to get to them early. And so, when they get excited early, and again, we go as early as pre-K, a lot of what we do is middle school and high school, but when you get excited about it, you stay with it. When you stay with it, you're more likely to major in the STEM fields. If you're more likely to major in the STEM fields, you're more likely to take a STEM job that pays more than twice as much as a non-STEM job. And we've got a longitudinal study that really looks at that in depth, and it's powerful to see. And then the last thing is around, again, this sustained learning, right? So they get excited about it. On a team, they get excited about it. In school, where do they go? And we're building out, we've got two, we're building out actually one very close within a few blocks of here, and we're building one out currently in the Bronx of these STEM centers. And so these are, think of this as sort of like the library system of the 21st century, where it is free and accessible, open 7 days a week, and you can walk into this facility and get access to all of these resources. And I'll tie all of this up with a bow. My favorite anecdote of many is that in 2022, 2 Title I schools that we worked with at our STEM Center at Cornell Tech won the citywide robotics championship, and they beat Stuyvesant in the semifinals. They beat Dalton in the finals. I've got lots of those anecdotes. It was awesome. And by the way, as one spectator said, March Madness has nothing on this. It's a heck of a lot of fun as well. So.
That's great, Michael. And congratulations to that team. That's really amazing. So, Kayon, let me bring you in a little bit more, talking about, because we started to talk more about young people. And I was looking at some data recently. I was really struck by, even as recently as 10 years ago, we had very few tech-focused programs in our career and technical education high schools, focused on what we think of as pathways into tech-powered jobs. That's really changed in recent years, and the Brooklyn STEAM Center is a big part of that. And I think the idea that there is, that you've been really working to change that narrative around how building career education into high school can lead to some of the highest quality jobs in New York City. So help us understand how that works. How can a student who comes from one of your partner high schools to the Brooklyn STEAM Center get to a tech career, through that pathway? And what do you need to be able to make sure that that impact can expand to more Brooklynites?
Absolutely. I want to say Team 354 here, former New York City First robotics team member. I went to high school right across the street, Westinghouse High School, and I was a former special needs student, so could be a part of that longitudinal study. What I want to say is just a little bit of background and origin story of the Brooklyn STEAM Center. We were birthed out of a grant from the New York State Education Department when New York City became labeled the most segregated school district in the entire country. And kind of based on my own personal story as well. I was a special needs student, tracked into a vocational high school, told I wasn't college bound, I have a doctoral degree, go figure, and told that I should only apply to those vocational high schools because that's where people like me went. And so I listened to that. I went ended up at Westinghouse High School, met my wife, who was from a different background than I am, from different means, lived out in Woodhaven, Queens, at this beautiful colonial house, and I was like, man, I want to marry this girl someday. I got to get my stuff together and be able to provide for her at that level. There's no way she's coming to live in the projects with us. From that, and so it was my inspiration. She became my inspiration. And in Westinghouse, I was able to earn an industry credential as a certified web developer. I had a paid internship with the MTA. I had a job offer right out of high school, making more money than every single person in my home combined, and 8 of us lived in our 1-bedroom under the radar in Albany projects. And so, you know, just having that experience so early on, and I didn't stay in coding because, you know, even though it paid a lot more than what I ended up doing, which is education, literally half, and I wanted to pay that forward. For me, it's important that it's not just about what you know, but who you know. And so when we set out to open the Brooklyn STEAM Center, we wanted to do that inside of where the tech sector lives, inside of where the manufacturing industry lives. And so the Brooklyn STEAM Center literally is inside the Brooklyn Navy Yard's biggest property, Building 77. We're on the 3rd floor. We make industry super accessible. We can have folks come down from the elevators to come into our classrooms and teach parts of the curriculum with a trained educator. Our students are able to go upstairs and downstairs for internships, across the street to New Lab, you know, where tech entrepreneurs are creating amazing products and things that are going to take off in the future. I've seen self-driving vehicles being beta tested before Tesla became a thing, and they sold that data to Tesla. So we wanted to ensure that our young people are front and center to where that action is actually happening, and that they're able to build that social capital. Because, you know, otherwise they're being left out. To your point earlier, that Black and brown people are only holding a slight 20% of those jobs here in New York City, while they're the majority. So that's why we wanted to ensure that we provide that access, and we are listening to industry, and we are responsive to industry. One prime example of that is, you know, in our curriculum, we didn't teach Python early on, and my teachers didn't know how to teach Python. But we raised funds. We hired an industry professional to come in for part of their day. They met with the instructor. She helped support with the pedagogical piece, and she became the student for 3 months, and that happened over the course of 2 years, and now she teaches Python better than any industry professional probably could. And so that's the power of being able to immerse a lot of this training inside industry and leverage partnerships with industry to support the training that our community receives.
You know, Ken, let me follow up on that point, actually, because I wanted to ask you a little bit about this approach that you've taken at the STEAM Center, which is so successful that you've now got demand to replicate it in other boroughs. But we're talking about Brooklyn here, and so I'm interested in this because I don't know that it's possible maybe to replicate the STEAM Center across Brooklyn over and over and over again. You've got demand now to, you know, build a Bronx STEAM Center, and there's interest in a Queens STEAM Center that Councilmember Williams talked about at our event a few weeks ago. I guess my question, though, is how do you replicate what's working about the Brooklyn STEAM Center or in more Brooklyn high schools, so that it's not just based on having everything kind of come together the way it has at the Navy Yard campus, but to be able to embed what you've learned in other high schools all over the borough? What would that look like?
So it looks like the HEAT program, now led by my superintendent, Michael Prayer, where our scholars from across South Brooklyn schools are going into industry. They're traveling, they're leaving their high schools. If they, you know, a lot of our young people finish a lot of their high school requirements very early on, and they're opting to not necessarily take advanced placement courses, but to take courses in STEM and in tech. But we're doing that inside the industry. So the students are going to Google, and they're being taught by a Google professional, side by side with a licensed and trained educator for credit, or elective credit, and they're getting those tech skills from someone that's doing them each day. And it's making it more accessible. So that model could be elevated and lifted up. Or if we incentivize more industry professionals to come into education, whether that's through like an adjunct type of position, and get away from like full-time, you have to be a full-time licensed instructor. Let's allow for and leverage. There is a state education title called the adjunct lecturer title. Allow for those types of titles to live within our education system, to allow more professionals to get into our space and be as nimble and responsive to the needs of their respective, especially in the tech sector that changes like by the second, to be able to ensure that our young people are getting the skills they need for access into these in-demand careers.
I love that. I think, you know, that's exactly what the Tech and Residence Core is for CUNY, to bring industry professionals to teach as adjuncts in the CUNY system, but to build something like a Tech and Residence Core throughout, you know, the high schools could be a powerful shift. But
And even further down into free K.
Yes,
right?
well, I want to follow up on that too, but I actually want to also look a little bit beyond K through 12, and maybe Helen, bring you in a little bit on this too, and we'll come back to that point. I think it's crucial. But we can't have this conversation about expanding access to tech careers in Brooklyn and not talk about working adults too. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of working age adults in Brooklyn without college degrees, folks who are maybe unemployed or underemployed, many of whom may be interested in pursuing a career in technology but wouldn't even really know how to start. And that's where NPower really shines. So I want to ask you a little bit more about, you know, if we're going to succeed in expanding access to careers for Brooklyn residents, it's got to include a focus, I think, on workforce development and on adults, adult learners. But help us understand, you know, NPower is maybe doing something that seems especially difficult because you're talking about folks that maybe have already in some ways really struggled within the school system, that have not been able to acquire the post-secondary credentials that can open up some of these pathways, and you're helping those folks. So help me understand a little bit more specifically, you know, what role do you see adult-focused career training playing in this broader ecosystem? How do we ensure that the impact of a program like NPower can grow, where you're able now to serve, you know, hundreds of adults, but what would it take to be able to reach, you know, thousands?
You know the answer to that. It's dollars. And I have to defer to Kayon. You mentioned it's not what you know, it's who you know, and I think that is a critical piece of programs like ours. I'm a first-generation American who went to college and whose parents, as immigrants, said, you have to go to college and your choice is doctor or lawyer. Those are your two choices in life. But my parents couldn't help me in fundamental ways. They helped me pay for college, but they didn't speak English well, so I was doing my own paperwork, my financial aid paperwork, I was doing their paperwork, and they certainly didn't know anybody. So when I graduated from college, I was a little bit lost, and if I had a program like NPower or some of the programs that are represented on the panel, I think I would have had a very different career trajectory. And we are that lifeline for our students. We are that substitute, especially when you don't have those connections. So a typical student coming to NPower is unemployed or underemployed. Our average salary of those that are working is about $12,000 per year, and they will graduate on average with salaries that are about $50,000 per year. Debt-free, and they're working within 6 months of the day they stepped into our classroom. And I think that's pretty much the model that most of us on this panel have. The dollars are critical, and I think we've been reading a lot about the city. This particular administration is very focused on workforce development, and that's a wonderful thing, I think, like no other administration. But a lot of the dollars go to the bigger partners in industry. So we hear about high schools being supported, which is critical. We hear the CUNY system being supported, which is critical. But sometimes smaller programs like ours, we're an afterthought. And it's hard to get a piece of the funding dollars in New York City for programs like ours. It takes, and this is no secret, about $10,000 to put one of our students through the program. In New York, we train 200 students per year, so we're looking at a $2 million budget. That is difficult to replicate and to scale without the dollar investment. What makes our program unique is it's an extremely holistic system. So in addition to having 2 instructors in the classroom for every class of about 25 students with breakout sessions with tutoring, we have a really strong focus on social support. So our program, which a lot of the colleges don't necessarily have, includes 2 social workers for a class of 200 per year. And resources, and I'll tell you guys, we are in New York City and we have tremendous wraparound services. In our other regions where we exist, not every city is like that. So New York City is extremely well-resourced when it comes to social support. So if we can't help our students internally, our many partners in industry can. But another really critical piece, and again, so money, again, is in there, but another really critical piece to our success is the partnerships that we build with industry. And we could not do this without industry. And in fact, Amazon, AWS is one of our partners. They funded our cloud computing program. So I can't emphasize how important our partners, our primarily corporate partners are. In addition to funding, we do have a lot of wonderful partners in the corporate world. It's the volunteer engagement piece. It's mentoring our students. And something that we're seeing recently is our partners are now talking to us about developing systems to pipeline NPower students and similar students into their organizations. At the top of our panel, I had mentioned that there's a destigmatization of not having the college degree, and it took a decade, but we're getting there. But we're actually getting somewhere else, which is really unique. And I'm finding that some of our partners are now coming to us, and they said that they have developed or are developing a program specifically for learners that are coming out of untraditional educational backgrounds. They have programs in place. Blackstone is one that we're talking to that a lot of us are partners for. I know Perscolis is a partner. And there are actual programs designed to recruit talent that may not have that college degree. So they're looking at NPower to say, how do you onboard that? How do we get a program like that? Once we get the talent in the door, how do we make sure that there's a sense of belonging? We often hear about equity, diversity, inclusion. Those are very important pillars. But the belonging piece and actually setting the culture is also critical. So our partners are now recognizing that once we get the talent in the door and we're developing these pipelines, what do we now need to do to cultivate this talent, make sure they're blossoming and blooming in our organization and are successful? And I think this is probably one of the most exciting times in workforce development that we're seeing, certainly in the 10 years that I've been at NPower. The corporate piece is catching up really quickly, and they want to do right. They want to do exciting things. They want to be innovative. So I think it's a great time to ride the wave of partnerships between programs like ours and our corporate partners. But again, we'll throw out again, the dollars are critical for us to scale on a larger level.
Thanks, Helen. You brought up so many important points there. I want to touch on two of them and bring in the panelists on these. You know, one of them is about the idea of belonging. And I think it actually connects to something you were just talking about, Kayon, in terms of K through 8 going earlier than high schools. And we see the kind of self-selection occur as early as elementary school, where disproportionately it's black and brown students, girls in particular, who don't see themselves belonging in technology, in computing. We see that manifest in terms of who actually takes the computer science classes that now are available in almost every high school in New York City, thanks to the Computer Science for All program. But we also know that only about 17% of schools are actually meeting CS for All's equity and participation goals. So the big question here, I think, is what do we need to be doing now as a city? What can policymakers do to support the work that's needed to expand that sense of belonging in technology, to help make sure that a lot more young people, girls of color in particular, do see themselves belonging in technology-powered fields? And to me, it seems like that has to go way beyond high school, but what are one or two things that we need to be doing to change that? That's for everybody. Yeah, Evin, if you want to jump in, by all means. But
yeah, for sure, I'm happy to. So, I was, as mentioned, like when we started America in Tech, we first started in Brooklyn, then we scaled across New York City. Now we operate across Los Angeles and Miami as well. And what I can say is that the approach is pretty much the same, and what interests students is pretty much the same. When we're talking about the development of curriculum and the deployment of instruction, you have to make it cool. You have to make it relatable. That's the first thing that really gets young students interested in the work and seeing themselves in the technology space and wanting to learn more about it. So that's first. Secondly, I would say is then how do you make that information relatable? One of the biggest things that I picked up early on when we first started in 2014 was that when students were completing their final projects, we always had a section on their webpage or whatever the project was that they were completing where they had to create a leadership team, a CEO, a CTO, etc. I would say about 90% of the time, those leadership teams were never reflective of the students that we were actually serving, that being Black or Latinx students. They didn't see themselves in the industry. And so that was an aha moment for us to say, okay, we now have to develop curriculum where we're educating our students just not on the technology, but educating them on individuals that look like them in the space, right? Whether that's a high-profile individual or someone they maybe never even heard of, but they need to see visibility, representation of themselves in the space. So now over the years, since 2014, you see that those leadership pages are now more reflective of the students that we serve. I would say third, you have to show them what the end goal is. Okay, you're coming into this CS class, you're coming into this enrichment program for what? You're gonna learn X, you're gonna learn how to be a web developer, you're gonna learn product management, you're gonna learn UX, UI design, data science, cybersecurity. Okay, that equates to you what? That equates to you making about $115,000, $135,000 a year. So you have to put that end goal in front of them. By learning this, you can make this. By making this helps you do what? You open the conversation for them. And then they'll start to explain to you, well, if I make this, I can have a better life for myself, I can do things, blah, 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 blah. So you have to help show them the pathway. Because most often, people want a better life. We're just lost about that pathway. And as an educator, as a provider, you have to show them the pathway in front of them. And that's been our approach nationally, not just in Brooklyn. Like, Brooklyn is my home. I also went to a school across the street. I went to Science Skills Center High School. And, you know, what you'll realize is that people want more, and then we have all of these opportunities. We just need to step back and say, okay, the infrastructure is there, the opportunities are there, but what we now need to talk about is like, how do we make this information digestible? And by making this information digestible, you're now appealing to the individual. And I think often that's the gap there of getting more students interested in the space.
I want to piggyback on that. Shout out to Black Girls Who Code, dope organization trying to address a lot of these issues. First thing I want to do is stop calling it computer science. It sounds boring. It's intimidating. Let's start calling it things like creative technology or multimedia. That's what they called it when I was at Westinghouse, and I thought I was going in there to learn how to like shoot videos and do other cool things. But I ended up coding, and I enjoyed it, and I was successful at it because it wasn't intimidating. They called it something else. And you know, I think our messaging and to your point, the approach, the projects that we do, will drive excitement for young people. Like, why don't we, you know, have students build websites for the deli owners and apps for the barbershop, so you know we could book appointments and I don't have to wait in a chair for 2 hours on a cut. You know, that those we have to make it relevant. We have to help our young people see how they are able to apply those skills. In elementary school, my daughter, you know, we're privileged to live outside of New York City. At 7 years old, programmed telo drones to fly autonomous missions using Scratch, which is a block-based programming language. That got her interested in STEM. That got her interested in tech. So we need to do more of that. And you know, luckily, we raised enough money at the STEAM Center that's how we introduce our computer science pathway through projects like that. So we got to help our young people see the cool factor or the wow factor for programs like that. When I looked at the computer, and I actually helped write the CS for All curriculum with College Board a few years back, and the computer science exam, it's not relevant. It's very heavy theory. You know, there isn't a ton of really cool projects that students get to work on that has relevance. So I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, actually, and just to piggyback off of both of those, I think, you know, again, it's through our prism, again, of robotics, so it's the way we think. But, you know, again, it's fun, it's joyful, it's competitive, right? You are on a team, and so, you know, that concept of sport, and I think one of the stats you had let us know before this was either 11 or 17% of students, even though CS is you know, CS for all is for all students, it's a very small number. And right, either you call it something different, or just make it fun, right? So, you know, schools can actually check the CS for all box by doing robotics. That's fun, right? And so there's a way to change either, you know, the name or how it's done to make it fun and cool and engaging. And just as a side note, along the lines of making it sort of, you know, again, I guess fun and something you can root for, the mayor is having a robotics cup, so a mayor's cup for robotics, and we're going to run that on May 4th. And so that all sort of elevates this, right? And we think of ourselves often as sort of the NBA of robotics or the MLB, pick your sport. But again, it makes it fun, joyful, engaging, and again, something you can root for.
I'll second everything that was said here. And part of the reason why we landed on this concept of the Marcy Lab School being a program for 18 to 24-year-olds post-secondary is because we believe that there's like a last mile problem in the kind of tech hiring landscape. Programs that we partner closely with, the America on Tech, Code Nation, Black Girls Code, Girls Who Code, they've done an incredible job over the past 10 years of like boosting young women's ability to see themselves in the sector. And then you get to your first year of college and you say, I want to major in computer science. And you realize if I didn't have an AP computer science credit, if I don't have an AP calc credit, I'm fighting an uphill battle. And I think about the number of women who've come through programs like the Marcy Lab School and NPower and Gear Up and the list goes on. part of it is because we're able to help them circumnavigate the barriers that are in place for those folks who've had their interest piqued but haven't been able to access through the current system. One of the fellows that comes to mind from the Marcy Lab School, her name was Cielo. She was a beneficiary of a couple of programs like Girls Who Code, like formerly ScriptEd, Code Nation. She got to us in the interview process and told us that she dreamed of working in tech. She was a first-generation immigrant from Puebla, Mexico, and she saw herself as a tech leader. Unfortunately, she was a year behind on her associate's degree, still working really, really hard, but had not yet gotten to the point where she was actually able to write code. She's like, I'm losing faith in this process. If I stick around, I don't see a pathway towards actually being able to do the thing that I want to do. She gets to the Marcy Lab School, and we tell her, guess what? You actually don't need calculus, multivariate calculus, to be a high-level software engineer. There are a ton of invaluable skills that you do need, and we're going to bring them to you. But there are pathways that we can carve out for you so that you can get to the career of your dreams. Fast forward, she goes through our program, she navigates the pandemic through us, and she gets a job as an associate software engineer at the New York Times. She's 20, and she's working alongside of college graduates. Some of them know that she doesn't have a degree, some of them do. But she sees herself as a leader in this space. She sticks around. She comes back to her community for support often. She refers her siblings to the program because now she's the role model that people are looking forward to. And recently, she just bought a home at age 21 in New York, an investment property. And I think about the typical story is she goes to the normal pathway and doesn't see a place for herself and defaults back to what she's told she can do. And so if the question is, what else in addition to making sure that people see role models, see engagement opportunities, enrichment opportunities, it's like, well, how do we create alternative pathways that push away some of those barriers that have kept our people behind?
You'd be surprised at how many ways that you can do this. And as you guys were speaking, I'm like dumbfounded because you nailed it, and I agree with all of you. But we had a tiny tweak at our own organization just a few years ago, which was life-changing for our program. So our classes have always been really diverse. We serve the students of New York City, but it was predominantly male. And if you walked into a classroom, you could smell it. It was dudes, a lot of dudes. And we were intentional about recruiting more young women, and specifically young women of color, into tech. And now we realized we had 0 female instructors. So going back maybe 6, 7 years, not one woman in all of our locations, not one instructor was female. We are now at 40% female instructors in NPower. And in the metro area, which I oversee, New York, New Jersey, we are 50% female instructors. So our young women go into the program, and we know how to recruit them. But how do we engage them in the program? And most importantly, and you said something about belonging and coming back to the community, how do we engage them after they graduate so that they see themselves in the tech sphere, they see folks that look like them? And the simple thing is even getting a panel discussion of folks that are visiting my students that represents my students. Once upon a time, they were all CEOs and our CTOs or CIOs, and my students love that. They love seeing the guy that runs tech at Bank of America. But we also started incorporating alumni that may have come from our program or a similar program from a year or 2 ago now being represented, and they see themselves in that lifeline. And it's been critical for our program. It's a small change that had tremendous impact.
That's really helpful, and probably also means a little less Old Spice in the classroom than before, so that seems like an advantage. So I want to ask you all, because I want to get to the questions from this amazing audience as well, but I did want to ask everybody one other question, which is really about what government can do to help. Next week we'll hear the mayor's State of the City address. We're going to get a sense of the priorities for the year ahead. We're going to be followed in just a few minutes by 2 members of the New York City Council, by the Brooklyn Borough President. And this is really a chance for all of you, with all these different opportunities and ideas that you've already brought to the table, to speak to them directly. And I'd love to ask all of you, even if it's just in a few seconds, tell me, what's one thing that city officials can do to help support this work? What would you like to see the mayor run with? What could the council do to support this? The borough president's office? And this is open to everybody.
I'll start off, there's always sort of the obvious, everybody wants funding, and I think, I do, we all do, but I think, from our perspective, space. And so when I think about everything that we're doing, it actually doesn't cost that much. So we can probably set up, there are 12 public school districts, geographic districts within Brooklyn. you can have a network of STEM centers, again, this concept of the library system of the 21st century, in each school district for single-digit millions. And so it doesn't cost that much in the grand scheme of things to serve many, many, many students, educators, schools. But the other thing I was going to say that's a non-funding thing is space. And so we, and space is at a premium. So people think the libraries have space. They don't really have that much space. CUNY, they don't have much space either. But it's putting a stake in the ground. So we can provide the programming, we can provide the equipment along with the help of some elected officials. But it's finding the space and really thinking about getting back to deserts, right? Resource deserts. How do we think smartly about finding space in each of those locations, each, let's say, school district or city council district, to really nail that and put a stake in the ground?
So I know the mayor has a goal of 30,000 registered, or 30,000 apprenticeships by 2030. And I think that's important. I spoke to you earlier, Eli, about going through a teaching apprenticeship program here in New York City. It's kind of flew under the radar, has the highest retention rate of any teacher prep program in the entire nation. It's called the SVA program. And it's been our primary source for staffing our career and technical education schools. And so I think we need to incentivize, through policy, employers to participate in apprenticeships, whether that's through tax breaks or some other type of incentive. We really ought to think differently about the types of registered apprenticeships that we create. I think there's like one registered apprenticeship in the tech space in New York City. And we need to grow more. I mean, the Brooklyn STEAM Center is going to Switzerland in May to study apprenticeship models there, so we can help build out registered apprenticeship programs that align to our pathways, including cybersecurity and full stack development. So, we're trying to do this work, but we're only a small little school in Brooklyn. But I think the policy level, our government officials could incentivize that and make that a reality for more New Yorkers.
Make it easier, because we have apprenticeship programs nationwide. We are a registered apprenticeship provider, including in New Jersey, and it is more difficult in New York State to become a DOL registered apprenticeship provider and training provider. It is a little bit more difficult. So finding ways to alleviate the red tape and the bureaucracy of getting registered, I think would be really helpful, and putting us to work, including organizations like ours in the equation as a solutions-oriented organization. Put us to work.
I would say, if you're from Brooklyn, like this downtown, Metro Tech wasn't always like a sexy location, right? Like Albee Square Mall era, et cetera, et cetera. So, but things change. And I say that because I'm trying to lay a foundation of the way that I'm thinking about your question. Growing up, particularly when you asked the question around like East New York, Brownsville, the honest truth is the same feeling that my community had when I was younger is the same feeling that the community has today, where we don't feel heard, we don't feel supported, we don't feel like we're getting the investments, right? Like while Brooklyn has changed and different pockets of Brooklyn have changed, you haven't really seen that much change in East New York and the Brownsville sections of Brooklyn. And from my perspective, I would love to see a hub of innovation exist in those pockets of Brooklyn, something like a Metro Tech, something like Brooklyn Navy Yard. And Brooklyn Navy Yard wasn't even always the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Something like Industry Cities, right? I would love to see a concept like that make its way into deeper parts of Brooklyn. But when we're thinking about that implementation and that rollout, making sure that the community feels not just heard, anyone can feel heard. You hold a forum, you let people speak, you say you heard them. That's not hearing people. Actually taking the ideas, giving people credit for the ideas that they're proposing, and then implementing them with a community-focused lens in mind, I think that's the correct way for that implementation. So for the policymakers, I would love for policymakers to host things similar to what we do in the technology industry, hackathon-style events or design thinking-style events where we're addressing community-based issues, community is helping provide some of those solutions, but those solutions are actually being implemented, and then the individuals, the residents that are providing those solutions are being given credit for their ideas that may be rolled out. So I think that's an approach, and I know nothing is perfect, and I think that's something to also understand, that in life, nothing's ever gonna be 100% perfect, but I definitely think if we're all here in this space today, we want to put our best foot forward in making sure we're making the biggest impact possible. And those are some of my thoughts. But I would love to see a space for innovation in my hometown of East New York and Brownsville, because there have been some small initiatives, but nothing that's really blossomed over the years, and I think that's missing.
That's great.
If I had the magic wand and the question is like, what can government do to kind of create these pathways? It is being the change that we wish to see and really taking the lead on bringing non-traditional talent without college degrees into high-paying, upwardly mobile roles within the government sector itself. I think there's a corporate leaning in all of our work. Like Marcy doesn't exist without its corporate partners, and like our working hypothesis is that if we get our young people prepared to step into these jobs at companies like Amazon and Google, et cetera, will provide pathways to the middle class. But that hasn't historically been the story in this country. Like when you think about how did the middle class become created for white people several decades ago, it's like good union jobs that pay a sustainable wage, that are reliable, and then home ownership. And, you know, we're living in a different day and time now, but here in a city like New York, what would it take for the city to say, you know, and there are programs that are popping up, it's starting to happen. Well, what would it take for the New York City government to say, we're going to take the lead on creating pathways for talented, hardworking New Yorkers without a traditional college credential into the type of roles that like provide them a pathway into leadership, growth, and economic mobility? You cited the stat that 14% of East New York residents have a college degree. So if we really care about East New York, we want to see that number triple or quadruple. And you don't triple or quadruple numbers for large systems. That just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen overnight. And if the world is changing as quickly as it can, as quickly as it is, then what we owe it to those residents across the city is to be able to create faster pathways into these types of roles.
That's really helpful, and encouraging to see the governor announce just a couple of days ago she's directing officials across the state to reevaluate degree requirements for state government jobs. And obviously, big opportunity potentially for the mayor to do the same here in the city. So let's turn it over to our amazing audience. We have some time for some questions. We'll get right into our second panel. So lift your hands up, and just ground rules, please, your name, any affiliation, organization you're with, and please keep your question brief so we can try to get to as many as possible. So I'm going to start right here, a gentleman in the middle. Microphone is coming to you, and there'll be one coming on the other side. We'll go to the back of the room, gentleman with the hat, and then we'll come to the front of the room after that.
Really quickly, Greg Bishop.
Hey, Greg, I didn't see you.
Yeah, you doing, the gentleman. Executive Director of the Social Justice Fund. Each of you are sort of relying on corporate America, as you mentioned, in terms of their diversity, inclusion, equity, inclusion initiatives to bring in your students. I'm just curious in terms of where we are right now in this moment. Have you seen a retraction? How are you dealing with that? Because I'm just concerned that, you know, corporate America has sort of reneged on the promises that they've made over the past 2 years.
Hey, Greg. That is a great question, and I think when affirmative action was, flipped over, we did a lot of soul searching in my organization, and all that we can do, and we will continue to do, is to do our mission and do it well. Our corporate partners are extremely vested in diverse tech talent. They're vested in recruiting our young people. They're vested in orientating our young people, onboarding them, really cultivating them. So we've been really lucky in this fair, and we're just going to keep working at it and keep being successful at it. And we're very lucky that our partners, they agree with us. They love this mission. And even though it may not be, the government has changed, but it's still, for a modern company to be self-aware and to be culturally forward, it's still very important to them internally. And we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing really well, and we're going to keep fighting for that.
So I think we have a question. I saw we already have a microphone. Great. And then we'll come to the second row, and we'll go on from there. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Nellis with Red Hook Initiative and NWB Small Business Owner. My question is for you, Evin, and everyone on the panel. As we think about recruitment for young people in the city, I'm curious about if you all thought about what does it look like for you to partner with small business owners who are service providers in that tech space. I know that like there was comments about giving credit for ideas. Just want to be clear. I think gamifying esports, gamifying workforce development through esports is a really good idea, and it's something that I've been working on. But it's really difficult to like partner with institutions like yourself. So I'm just wondering if you thought about small business owners outside of just like this talent that you have in your organizations.
Yes, most definitely. And I'll answer, and then let me know if I'm not answering your question. I just want to make sure I'm answering it correctly. So at AmeriCon Tech, there's a few different ways that we work with small business owners. So one way is that when it comes to teaching our classes, so everything is paid for. So students receive payment to go through our program. All of the instructors are paid. A lot of the times when we're working with small business owners, maybe they're running a technology company, some of those owners or employees of those companies, they come to us as contractors, and they're actually the individuals that are helping deploy the curriculum to the students that we're working with. Because we want to take practitioners that are actually know how to use what they're teaching about in the industry and teach it back to the students that we serve. So the same way that we may contract someone from a larger organization, right, like at a larger technology company to teach our programming, we do the same thing with small business owners. That's one. Two, when it comes to job placement, everyone that goes through our programs, after they go through our year-long program, they have the opportunity to do an internship. We work with small business owners to help place our students into their organizations as interns. And often the way that we go about doing that is helping the small business owners find ways to subsidize the wages associated with that role. When we work with larger corporations, they usually have the budget line to pay for the internships. We know small business owners want to take on the talent that we have, but sometimes they may not have the budget line. And so we work with other resources to help find a way to cover those wages. And then I would say last but not least, when it comes to small business owners, we have a lot of career days. And when we think about our students, we make it very diverse regarding the individuals that we bring into the room to talk to them about the pathways and different areas that they can work in. So a lot of those individuals that make up the network of professionals that we collaborate with are small business owners. So those are some of the high level ways, but I want to make sure that I'm answering your question correctly from what I thought I was hearing.
Yeah, thank you. You did. Just the last piece is just really around in allowing those small business owners to support in the recruitment process of those participants. Like I imagine sometimes like creating bridge programs is like necessary for a young person to be even prepared. Because as you know, right, like oftentimes like NPower, Year Up programs like that, it's rigorous. It's rigorous work, right? And often some of the talent isn't ready to be successful, so there's some preparation that needs to happen. And I really think that bridge programs, small business, mentorship relationships can prepare people to be successful at your companies for placements. So
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, most definitely. That's exactly what we do. The students in our program have access to mentors, like you're saying. Before we even deploy students into internship opportunities, they all go through what we call a boot camp training. It's the same similar model where we have the individuals come in and they will re-prepare students before they go off into the summer into their internship opportunity. And as I was mentioning, like a lot of those individuals are small business owners locally that assist with that deployment of the instruction. But it sounds like you have a lot of great ideas, and I'm always down to collaborate. So once this is over, I would love to chat with you if you're still around, and maybe we could build more.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry, I see multiple hands up, but I did promise the second row here, so if we could just bring the microphone down. Thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you all for sharing your insights. My name's Jose Garcia. I wear many hats, so for today's purposes, I'm with Brooklyn Community Board 5, which is East New York. Actually, I'm part of the Economic Development Committee. We were actually asking about an organization in our area to do tech empowerment. So Evin, let's have a conversation after. My question is, to give some context here, 15 years ago, the Great Recession, killed essentially the job market prospects for college graduates, which has helped escalate the need for apprenticeship, programs like yours. And now we're seeing with all the layoffs between the big companies in tech, right? I'm part of a number of developer communities, and I'd say like 90% of them are looking for work. And so we're probably seeing another recession, not as bad as the 2008 recession, obviously, but it's causing this issue where people are graduating, not as bad in debt and as a college, but if they can't find work, and this seems to be like a new permanent situation in the sense that now with ChatGPT, the requirements may be that in theory, you could possibly learn everything you need to code with the internet. You may not even need a school anymore. So what are we doing so that we don't have a repeat of the recession that essentially made people question, is a degree even worth it anymore? Because we're going to see the same thing going on as if this continues.
Thank you for that question. It's a really good one, and it's real and timely. This tech hiring downturn we have felt very acutely. It's been a really challenging season for Marcy Lab School graduates and fellows as they navigate their education, wondering, am I going to have an industry to launch my career into? It makes me think about one of my board members who was a finance and econ major in undergrad. He is a few years ahead of me, and he graduated into the Great Recession. He had a job, and then it disappeared when that bank went under, and there was a job no more. And I remember looking up to him, and my major in undergrad was econ. I kind of saw that and was shook, and I think it's not a coincidence that I'm in education now. But after his job went away, he ended up getting a job at an incredible nonprofit SEO. He worked for a little bit and used the small amount of experience that he did have to be able to give back to an organization that did have a need in the midst of that economic downturn. He worked in that nonprofit sector for a couple of years before transitioning back over to the private sector, and still currently deeply involved in the community. And I think about that as a model for right now. There's no escaping that this is a very terrible hiring market for all tech talent. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have posted articles highlighting HBS in Washington University grads who are struggling to get jobs. So everybody's feeling it. Our hypothesis is twofold. One, that the industry is changing, and it probably will never go back to the way that it was. You don't come back from a ChatGPT and not be fundamentally changed as the way we operate. And at the same time, these things are cyclical. So how do we navigate a moment like this? By getting really creative about helping our fellows add value in ways that they probably wouldn't have thought about in a really frothy hiring market. One, how can we partner with community organizations, with nonprofits, with government to help people who have technical skills be able to add value to places who typically don't see tech talent? We partner with an organization called DigiDems, and some of our graduates who have software engineering training are working on progressive campaigns to help advance policy that help communities outside of New York City. A program that I'm most excited about, supported by Greg Morris, who's in the audience here somewhere, is helping some of our graduates who have this extensive software engineering training get placed as computer science teachers in K through 12 schools. And then through programs like SVA, they have, if they want to, an opportunity to go back to tech in a couple years if they so choose, or to chart their own pathway as an alternatively certified teacher, and maybe one day sit on a panel like this. And so the question is, how do we find opportunities for people to add value in a moment when corporate doesn't look the same way it does, but hopefully one day, things will change.
On that optimistic note, Reuben, we have to conclude our first panel. Thank you all so much for being here, being part of this. If you join me in a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. And